reconvene to open session. There was no reportable action out of the proposed session. Agenda item 6 is approval of agenda, and what I'd like to do is move the public hearing, which is agenda item 12, next.
Okay.
Okay?
So moved.
You want to mention the on that?
So,
I would second that motion to move the agenda item 12 up.
okay, roll call vote. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have one board member who inadvertently couldn't, he had to go on a business trip. It's very rare for one of our board members to be attending the meeting by phone. We just wanted to let you know that. So since we have a board member away, every vote is a roll call. Okay.
Ready?
Yes.
Borstein,
Yes.
Kelly,
Kelly?
Meggs, here.
No, it's a vote.
The vote?
Yeah. To
Move the
amend the
agenda.
agenda.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Scylla?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Great.
And I'm here also.
Well, thank you. So, I'd like to go to item 12, it's a public hearing on the proposed 5-year schedule of wastewater utility service rates. We're going to have up the first item, agenda item A, is a presentation of the wastewater utilities rate charge study. Rate consultant, Mark Hildebrand is here.
I should have checked, so it's not reloaded. They're on the phone drive really quick, sorry.
While you're getting started there, my name's Steve Moore. I'm the general manager of the Ross Valley Sanitary District, and just wanted to let folks know about the structure of this item. First, we're going to have a presentation from the rate consultant on the proposed rates and how we got here to what we're proposing and the basis for that. And the second part, we'll be conducting a public hearing, a public protest hearing on the proposed rate schedule for these service charges, and this will be an opportunity for members of the public to come and voice their protest orally. I'll mention, if you want to be counted as a protest officially, you do have to make it in writing. So it could be as simple as just a post-it note, but it has to be in writing. But we welcome your oral comments and the discussions that we can have about this issue. Then, after that, we'll close the minimum 45-day protest period required under Prop 218, and we'll have a break at that point where we will have the protests officially counted. We'll reconvene, accept the protest count officially, and at that point, the board will consider adopting an ordinance for enacting the sewer service charges at their discretion at that point. And so that's the way this proceeding will be organized. And happy to answer any questions, or if any other staff, folks, council, or board members have anything to add. Thank you.
May I have a point of information? Just a point of information, my name is Julie McKenty, I'm the clerk of the board. If you would like to submit a written protest, you're welcome to do so to me, and I'll date stamp them and add them to the official count.
Okay, no further comment or questions. We'll hand the floor over to Mark Hildebrand, who's the consultant, or third-party company that conducted the rate study that we've been discussing since March of this year. Mark.
Can you lower the lights a little bit?
Thank you, Steve, for that. So again, I'm Mark Hildebrand, Hildebrand Consulting, and I've worked with the district over the last several months to do the current rate study and develop the recommendations. So what we're going to cover today is a presentation that the board has seen several times now, but we'll go over it in detail for the benefit of the public that's seen it for the first time. First, I'll cover some of the key financial outcomes that we've observed since the last rate study, which was about 4 or 5 years ago. We'll talk about the financial assumptions that went into the model to develop the rates that and the financial outlook for the next 5 years. And then we'll look at some of the rates that came out of the financial plan. So at a high level, the 3 steps that go into a rate study are, first you look at your revenue requirements, which is essentially a financial plan. So that's really looking at all the revenue that's coming in the district and all the expenses that are going out. So you're looking at your operating costs, your capital costs, your debt service, and then you're looking at your rate revenue and tax revenue and other sources of revenue, and just developing an understanding of whether you have enough revenue to pay for your costs, how much capital spending you can afford, and you look at different scenarios of debt financing and optimizing the financial plan to minimize the impact on rates, but to make sure that the district can afford to pay for its operating costs and its capital expenditures. The next step is we do cost of service, which is, once we understand how much rate revenue we need to determine how we're going to allocate those costs to different customers, customer classes. And then the final step is the rate design, where we decide, now that we know how much revenue we want to collect from different types of customers, how are we going to collect it? Is it going to be a fixed charge? Is it going to be a variable charge? Is it going to be a combination of the two? And so those are the 3 major steps, and we'll go into those 3 in more detail over the course of this presentation. So the observations that we made, because we wanted to look back at the study from 2014 to understand what assumptions they made back then and how those forecasts that they made played out over time, to understand how it will help us make better decisions for our forecast, and also just to understand where we are now and why we are where we are. So we did find that the CMSA costs, which that's the wholesale provider of wastewater treatment. So Ross Valley sends its wastewater to CMSA, which treats the water, and so it gets charged for that service. Those costs that were billed to Ross Valley were 6% higher than expected 5 years ago. Ross Valley's O&M costs, their own O&M costs, were 15% higher than projected. But when we looked into this particular item, we found that it was because it was a change in accounting practices, where they Ross Valley used to capitalize certain O&M costs. So in other words, when there was a capital cost and staff would work on that cost, they would take that staff salary cost and put it in the capital budget rather than the O&M budget. And they stopped doing that practice, or they changed it significantly. And so that was the lion's share of why we found that the O&M costs increased over time. The capital spending over the past 3 years is very consistent with what the plan had projected. And from my perspective and the experience that I've had, I find this to be very encouraging, because lots of times what you'll have are utilities that have big plans for how they're going to spend their money on capital, and they're going to invest in the system, and then they just don't have the person power to do it, or they simply don't have the initiative to get it done. But in this case, Ross Valley had a plan of completing a significant amount of capital spending, significantly more than they had historically, and they got it done. So that was encouraging. And then the near-term capital spending is significantly higher than the historical average. So one thing that happened 5 years ago was there was a consent decree, and there was a significant amount of capital investment that the district was forced to do. And at the time, the amount of capital spending was expected to drop off about now, and instead what we're finding is that those costs are just increasing even more, that there's more projects that are being identified to reduce the I&I problem, which is the inflow and infiltration, which causes the overflows during storm events and sewage discharges into the bay, which in turn gets the district fined by the Water Quality Control Board. So those are the events that the district's trying to reduce by shoring up its infrastructure and spending more on its capital. So a snapshot of where we were as of July 1st, about 1 year ago, because that's when the fiscal year starts, so that's the starting point that we use. We find that we had, let's see if I've got a pointer. But we have about $7.5 million in unrestricted cash at the time, another 13 or so million in reserves, which are kept in the event of a rainy day, emergency reserve, operations reserve. And then there's another $16.6 million that was proceeds from a 2018 revenue bond. Those are expected to be expended entirely by the end of this fiscal year. So really, what we would expect is about $21 million to be remaining after this year. The current revenue, to give you a sense of where the revenue comes from for the district, almost 73% of it comes from the bill that customers pay every month. Another 25% of it comes from ad valorem property tax, which is paid only by customers that are in what we call the Ross Valley service area as opposed to the Larkspur service area. There's two major service areas, and what distinguishes them is that one group of customer pays the ad valorem tax, which goes to the benefit of the district, whereas in the Larkspur service area, they pay that same property tax, but it goes to the benefit of their city for other services that they receive from their city. And that's $7 million in ad valorem property tax that's paid. In terms of expenses, what we see here is an extension of what I was saying earlier, where you see that 64% of the spending is capital, which from a metric standpoint, when we look at different metrics and looking at how utilities are performing, that's actually a really good sign. When a utility is spending most of its money on capital, that means it's spending most of its money on building the infrastructure that's serving the community, as opposed to more on salaries or whatnot. So this ratio of spending is really good if you compare it to other utilities throughout California. And you can see the treatment cost is about 9% there. And debt service is another 7%. And debt service, you could also basically classify that as a capital expense as well, since it's debt that's being paid, that's paying for capital projects. Some of the key financial assumptions behind the model, we assumed that costs in general were going to escalate at about the recent historical average, which is about 3.3%. CMSA cost escalation, and talking to them and trying to get a sense of how the rates are going to increase over time. They let us know that we should expect about 3.5% cost increase per year. And then the property tax revenue escalation based on recent historical trends of appreciation in property tax, we expect that to go up by 4%. And then we also are proposing some debt, and so here, those are some of the terms of the debt that we're assuming that the district would get, which is pretty cheap money, right, relative to private sector interest rates. Here is a graph of the expected capital spending over the next 14 years or so, or sorry, 10 years. We show a little bit in the historical spending to put some perspective of how much has been being spent. This is this current fiscal year. The Comcast building is a large one-time expense of purchasing a new corporate office, and then Larkspur Landing is a major one-time expense of cleaning up a property that's owned by the districts. There was some pollution that occurred on it decades ago, and the district is finding itself responsible for needing to remediate the site, and so that's a one-time expense there. So other than that, all the black signifies primarily the R&R, the repair and replacement of mostly pipes in the ground to reduce the amount of infiltration during rain events and leaking during rain events. So for the debt strategy that we're proposing for this financial plan, we are proposing a $35 million bond be issued, and I believe that's already done, or it's in the process of being issued. And that $35 million bond is to help pay for this spike of spending. Generally speaking, that's how you want to, for utilities, for sewer and water utilities, The best time to use debt is when you have an anomaly like this, where you want to be able to pay for a large amount of capital spending that's uncharacteristic of your typical capital spending. And so that's why we're proposing a $35 million bond to pay for that. And then we also are proposing to put in for an SRF loan, which is particularly cheap. It's 2% interest for a gravity sewer improvement project, and that's a application that the district is putting in for next year. Going forward, the district is hoping to get to a point where it can pay as you go, is what they call it, which means that we're hoping to avoid future debt by being able to achieve a level of rate revenue where they can pay for their capital projects with cash. Because debt financing is slightly more expensive because of the interest rate, so it's better to pay with cash. But again, when you have a spike like that, if you don't debt finance it, then you have to spike your rates, which nobody likes. Okay, so this is the same graph of capital spending, and it's showing which we identified specific projects in here that are going to be debt financed. So you can see the dark green are specific projects in those 4 years that are going to be financed with that $35 million bond and the SRF loan. For your reserve policies, there's 3 different reserves that we're recommending. One is an operation and maintenance fund balance reserve, and that's equal to about 6 months of your operating budget. That's consistent with industry standards for how much you keep in that fund in the event that costs increase significantly or that revenue for some reason changes. The emergency reserve is 10% of your operating budget, or $2 million, and that's in the event that you have some sort of catastrophe with a pump station a lift station or something collapses, a sinkhole. You want to have cash in the bank just in case that happens, and you can pay for that without having to take it out in an expensive short-term loan. And then the capital improvement or replacement fund balance is an extra reserve that's not required, but it's really to help deal with some of the spikes that you'll get. So, you know, if this doesn't end up being totally even, where you have a small spike here and this is lower, if you keep a capital reserve, you can help smooth those mini spikes out by having extra cash in the bank so that you can get through the ebbs and flows of capital spending easily. So this has a lot of information on it, but it's basically the culmination of all the financial information that I just described. And this is the forecast over the next 10 years of what we expect the costs and the revenues to be. It includes the proposed revenue increases down here. So you can see that what we're proposing are these % rate increases over the next 5 years. It's part of what was in the public or the notification that was received in the mail. What we see here is in the bar charts are expenses. So the dark blue is your operating expense, your dashed or your hashed light blue, white is debt, and the light blue is your capital spending. In the background you have the green, and it shows this dark green at the bottom is your tax revenue, and the light green here is your rate revenue, and this dark green is the increase in rate revenue that you'll get as a result of these increases in rates. So you can see that any year where your expenses, where the bar chart is above the background, you're in a deficit that year, you're spending more than you're collecting. And so you can see the fund balance down here is in red. You can see it dropping during years where you're spending more than you're collecting, and then rebounding a bit. And really what we try to do is just get those even. We want to get the expenses even with the revenue. And so that's what this financial plan shows. And it incorporates all the debt strategy that we discussed. This is some background on the rate increases that occurred in the past, and this is interesting for context because this shows what happens when you delay or you put off rate increases. what you can see here is that in the past, the district has gone long periods with very, very small rate increases, minimal rate increases, and you can see the result is that what you have to do as a result is you have to have large spikes in rates in order to make up for the lost time. Then you can see a sort of a change in the practice here where in the last 5 years there was more of a steady rate increases, so we're not seeing those spikes. And that's consistent with what we're proposing here, which are steady increases in order to meet our revenue requirements rather than large spikes that people find to be unaffordable because it hits them so quickly. So that's the end of the financial plan portion. I'm going to now shift gears to the cost of service. Does the board have any questions on any of that material? I know we've covered a lot in the past, so but maybe for the benefit of the public, if I covered anything too quickly, you have any questions?
I don't think the board does. If the public has questions, we'll save them for during the public hearing, and then you can ask them in the presentations.
Yeah.
We'll open the public hearing after this.
I'd be happy to go back to whatever slides you have questions on.
So, board, no questions now?
Yeah.
I have no questions for Doug.
What, Doug?
Doug doesn't have any.
Okay,
I could have, yeah.
okay, I just have a few, because you're right, we've gone over this. On, where is it? On the debt service of 7.1%,
Yeah.
that's for 20 years?
That's a
Because
snapshot.
we have old bonds
That's a snapshot right
that are
now.
mixing in with new bonds.
Right.
So we don't have that information.
Over time, that will change, you're right. That percentage is about to go up because you just issued another $35 million bond. I don't know, I don't have the percentage off the top of my head, what it'll go up to.
Okay. So currently, this might be for you, Steve, we're doing about 4 miles a year replacing sewer, right? When we go back to pay as we go, we hope after the 5 years, that's our projected plan, we'll go back to 2 miles a year, and that will bring down costs. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, we think our data collection will help us justify less mileage per year and still meet, be risk management oriented. So we think we can use our information we've been collecting to make a case to justify less aggressive capital work. But we have to still do that work this year. And then once we get the permission, the acknowledgement that something more like 2 miles a year is justified, and then it will match these assumptions about a lesser commitment of funds to capital going forward the next 5 to 10 years. But we believe we can justify it and successfully switch gears from the 4 miles a year, more like a 2 miles per year.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Okay, so now I'll shift gears to cost of service. So cost of service, as I pointed out, is determining how the costs of the utility are going to be passed on to specific types of customers. And in this case, as I mentioned before, you have 2 major service areas. You have the Ross Valley service area and the Larkspur service area. And what distinguishes these 2 service areas is simply the taxes that are paid, the property taxes that are paid by the Ross Valley customers, which go to the benefit of the district, as opposed to the Larkspur area, which does pay the same property taxes, but those property taxes goes to the city of Larkspur, which is in turn used to pay for services that benefit the people of Larkspur. So the taxes paid by the Ross Valley customers are going to the benefit of the entire utility, whereas Larkspur's property taxes are going to the benefit of only the citizens of Larkspur. Within those service areas, they have the same general types of customers. We look at single-family accounts, single-family with ADUs, and ADU is an accessory dwelling unit, which is, in-law unit, multifamily dwellings, commercial low-strength, and commercial high-strength. So commercial high-strength would typically be restaurants or whatnot, which put in significantly higher loads into the system, and it's more expensive to treat. And the district is charged more by CMSA for higher strength sewage. And so the customers who are contributing to that higher strength are being asked to pay for that. So you can see how many different accounts we have. in each. And then we've calculated EDUs are equivalent dwelling units, so a single family home and a multifamily dwelling unit are essentially one EDU. A single family with ADU, we'll talk about how we calculate those in a moment, but you can see how many EDUs we have in each and the dwelling units. So the rate structure that we are proposing is very similar to what you have in place now. We're not proposing any significant changes, but we are making some refinements as we move forward. So a single family is sort of your common denominator. It's one EDU, one equivalent dwelling unit. Multifamily, based on water usage data that we have, looking at how much water is used during the winter in a single family home versus an apartment, is going to be charged 90% of a single family home. Because they do use less water, and indoor water that is, and therefore they produce less sewage. And then a commercial account gets a classification of one EDU for every 215 gallons per day during the winter. So essentially 250 gallons per day in the winter is what a typical single family home produces in sewage. And so when a commercial account uses 250 gallons, they get one EDU. If they use twice that, then they'll get assigned 2 EDUs. They do have a minimum of 1 EDU assignment to them. So if they only use 100 gallons, they'll still get the minimum 1 EDU charge. Let's see if I missed anything else. So then the high strength EDUs are multiplied by 2.34. That's an analysis that was done by the study 5 years ago. I reviewed the methodology. It's basically looking at the BOD, which is the biological oxygen demand, and suspended solids, which is another measurement of strength. And it was determined that 2.34 was an appropriate multiplier. I reviewed it. It's consistent with industry standards, and so we're going to leave that the way that it was. In addition to this, there's a couple other topics. We're going to talk about accessory dwelling units, the property tax contributions, and the minimum charge for commercial. So accessory dwelling units are a hot topic in the state right now. There's a series of laws that are being imposed by the state on local government that's forcing local government to acknowledge and to legitimize accessory dwelling units to help alleviate the housing crisis in California. So basically local government is being asked to take down the barriers that are sometimes associated with being able to build onto your home and to be able to create smaller affordable housing on a single family home unit. So these are becoming more prominent everywhere in California, and the question is, what do we charge a single family home that has an ADU? Because charging a second EDU seems excessive, because usually it's one person living in there, or it's an Airbnb where there's only people there part of the time. Unfortunately, they're not on a separate meter, so we don't have hard data on exactly how much water is being used in them, but just based on our knowledge of how these types of units are being used, we're proposing that it's equal to about a half an EDU. So the rates that are going to be charged for ADUs is 1.5 times a single family EDU. The property tax application is basically calculated, so by the property tax application, we haven't shown you the rates yet here, but I think most of you are already familiar that the Ross Valley customers pay less than the Larkspur customers, Larkspur service area customers in their service rates. And this study is actually proposing that difference increases from the current difference of $238 to $269 to about $395 per EDU. Again, as I explained earlier, the logic behind this is that the Ross Valley service area customers are paying for what amounts to a benefit to the district, whereas the Larkspur customers are paying that same amount, but that money's going into, I'm not sure where it goes into their general fund for the city, which helps pay for the police, parks, however the city decides to spend that money, but it goes to the benefit of the Larkspur customers. So the logic behind using this money to offset the Ross Valley service area customers is that they get the benefit of that property tax. So essentially this puts the two customers on equal footing in terms of the amount of sewer service that they're paying for. I think that covers it for this slide. And then finally, the commercial minimum. Currently, the district does not charge commercial accounts that have no water usage at all a sewer charge. That's not a policy that was ever adopted. It's simply a practice that's developed over time that when the account, when a commercial account is shut down, they simply stop getting their sewer bill. But the problem with that is that the district's costs continue. The district still needs to pay for all of the infrastructure that serves that commercial account, whether it's open or closed. The amount of costs that are just based on the actual sewage that goes down is limited to the CMSA costs. So CMSA does charge Ross Valley a certain amount for the flows that go into their facility. And so that is a cost that the district doesn't incur. So it's about 25% of their operating costs. But all of the other costs, all the capital spending of fixing the pipes, of the collection system, and paying the salary of all the operators, that's going to happen whether the account is open or closed. And so what's being proposed is that the commercial minimum for commercial accounts that have no sewage flows be 75% of an EDU rather than 0. And here are the proposed rates for year 1 after those recommendations. You can see we have the Ross Valley rates up top, the Larkspur rates down below. You can see we have current rates here, proposed rates here. Here's the change. Sorry, my headers seem to be missing, but here's the change between the current rates and the proposed rates. Here's the percent difference. And then in year 2, all of the rates will go up by the same 6.6%. So there won't be a difference in the categories. They'll all go up by the same percentage. But they are going up by different amounts this year because of the changes in the policies that I just described over the last 10 slides. And here's the full 5 years of proposed rates. So you can see the percent increases up here and the full 5 years of rates that are being proposed through 2023. Here's a rate survey that shows the rates within mostly Marin County. You can see that the current rates for Ross Valley are, well, both of them are largely in the middle, but the current rates are here, and then the proposed rates are up slightly. The current Larkspur rates are here, and the proposed, looks like there's a mix-up on these slides, but the proposed Larkspur rates is this one, not this one. That's Mill Valley right here. So the proposed is right there. And that's the end of my presentation. So as was pointed out, I think the next step is that the public will get an opportunity to speak. Then the board will deliberate. After that deliberation, you will tally the protest ballots to ensure that 50% of your customers have protested. And if they haven't, then you're free to vote on the proposed rates.
Okay, and I'd now like to declare the public hearing on the Proposition 218 public protest hearing on the proposed 5-year schedule of wastewater utility service rates. And you're all going to get a chance to speak if you want. First of all, we're going to have a little introduction from our general manager. We're generally going to say about 3 minutes. We're not going to be too tight because there's not many of you. And if you have questions, I think we'd like to handle those as well. And so Steve, could you give us this time?
Well, I think Mark covered a lot of the process, so I won't take very much time. Just thank everyone for showing up and listening to the rationale for the proposed sewer service charges in the process to date. And some explanation of why there's some differences in the first year. And we welcome questions and input on this process. And I'll just point out that our system really is unique in a lot of ways. The Ross Valley system is, like I like to tell people, it's made of clay and it's shot full of holes. And we're in the highest rainfall district in the Bay Area. And we have steep slopes going down flat areas, and all of this creates a lot of operational challenges. And we have very narrow roads, so when we try to fix things, it's a little more expensive than in wide street communities like, oh, I don't know, Fairfield or Vacaville, or go south of San Jose. It's just easier to do the work in that kind of a setting than where we're at. So I will point out that if you compare ourselves to our neighbors, we're right in the middle of where the rates are. We're not on the high end, but I would just make the point, this is that slide there, that our capital needs are on the high end of that group of agencies. If you go to Las Colinas to the north, they're a newer community in Terra Linda. They do not have the level of capital fixing and O&M fixing. We go out and do 4-foot sections to fix holes in sewers that Las Colinas does not have to do because of the age of our system. So I would submit, just for your edification, that on that scale, we have higher capital. We're on the high end on capital needs, but this board has done a great job of managing rates, so we're not on the high end of the rates. But we want to do our best to find that balance of debt versus pay-as-you-go, because the type of investments we're making are lasting 50 to 100 years. So we don't think it's fair to have the current folks pay all the money fix these pipes that will benefit 1, 2, 3 generations from now. So the idea of taking some debt on is justified for that reason, that future generations would pay their fair share for the investments being made today. It's a 100-year-old system. We'd like to get another 100 years out of it, and we're at that point, and that's why that capital spike that you saw in that graph is there. We're dealing with some deferred work. We're getting through the bulk of it. And we do believe, as we look forward, we're not going to continue this high rate of capital work. The short-term issue of cleaning up the site at Larkspur Landing and getting the building for our operations so we can have a public meeting like this in the building where we work, for instance. Those are one-time expenses that we can pay back sooner than 20 years. We've structured our financing so that we can not be in that level of debt for too long. And I would use the analogy of when you buy a new house, you don't keep the old house. And that's the same here. We have existing real estate that we can part with when we get the new real estate. And so we're in that transitional period right now. We're trying to use debt so that those short-term transactions don't affect our ratepayers. So I just want to point out a couple of highlights that you touched on. And then at this point, really invite questions and comments, because we know that 6.6% a year does outpace cost of living of 4% or 3% a year. But that's attributable to construction costs that are higher than inflation and the need to catch up to deferred work. But I think the future looks good as far as getting back to a more sustainable capital program. And these rates, thanks to Mark Hildebrand, to take an objective look at where we're at and work with us and the board to make this an affordable transition. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, Steve. Now, we invite any member of the public to come up to the podium and you're entitled to speak for about 3 minutes, and we'd be happy to hear you. And it would be nice if you gave us your name and your community.
So just for point of information, the timer will go here, but if you need a little extra time to wrap up.
I'm planning on like 40 minutes or so.
Happy to
A lot of questions.
Yeah.
My name is Kate O'Loughlin. I just moved to Larkspur 3 months ago, and And I counted my pennies to be able to buy a house, and was really proud when I did a loan 3 months ago. And was slapped with the sewer lateral bill, which is going to be about $15,000, which is no joke. And then was equally surprised to get this flimsy one-time notice in the mail that has what I think to be some false advertising. It doesn't, it says 6% increases in the first year. If someone actually takes the time first to read this and then takes the time to crunch the numbers, you'll see in Larkspur that the increase is actually 15%. So I just, I protest this, and I feel like that while maybe it is being passed in compliance with Prop 218, I feel like it's done in bad faith without a lot of notice. And so that's just my general statement. I don't think, if you look at how property tax is passed, there's clear procedure and there's clear buy-in from the community. This was passed with one family. And I think what's very interesting to me, and maybe you can help me with the numbers, is that if every single person that is going to be impacted by these rate increases protested, it's still not enough. It's not sufficient to meet the 50% threshold. Again, I think that's done in bad faith. And so just a couple questions, I guess, for the board and Steve, for you as well. First of all, I just want to clarify, is it true that Larkspur pays its property taxes and their sewer services? We're paying property taxes to Larkspur, is that correct?
Yes.
That are supposed to cover sewer services. And then, so this is an additional fee to that property tax, is that correct? So we're paying twice?
Well, we're not getting any property tax from the Larkspur, from the old Larkspur. I think from the Green Bay Larkspur, the newer Larkspur, we are. But we are getting property tax from the rest of Ross Valley. And it's about 23% of our total revenue. And it's pretty much dedicated to capital. And so surprisingly, a lot of our capital expenses in Larkspur. And so residents of the majority of the Ross Valley service area pay both the service charge and property tax to the Ross Valley Sanitary District. In downtown Larkspur, you only pay a service charge. You don't pay a property tax to the sewer district.
Now, why is that? Why is that? Why do you have this arrangement with Ross Valley and not this arrangement with Larkspur? I'm curious about that.
Well, others can answer that.
We originally did not start, and before we annexed the Larkspur, the old Larkspur had their own conveyance system. Okay? And then shortly after the whole CMSA, JPA, which we're all part of, came to be, Larkspur,
Joint Powers Authority.
the Joint Powers Authority, Larkspur requested that we annex them into our system at that point. And at that point is when they decided not to match our rate structure at that time. So the Larkspur
Was
decided,
this done in a negotiation or agreement, or?
I know it was many
Yeah,
years
so
ago.
so are the
Annexation agreement.
constituents paying for a bad deal that the parties didn't think about? Because that's what it seems like to me. Maybe that probably should have been negotiated at that point, right? And so now, whether it's negligence of the attorneys on either side's party, I don't know. But if that structure is established with Ross and the Ross Valley area, and it's not with Larkspur, it's not my fault that then that you are now entitled to, increase fees 15% and over the next month. I think from June to July 1st, I think it's a bump of 15.5% increase. Just something to think about, and I just want to make sure that my voice is heard. I know nobody reads this, so I know that there's no way that this is not going to pass, which is unfortunate. But I just wanted to at least be on record saying that I protest it.
Okay, I want to just, I think it's been said, but I want to make it clear. The taxes, we get a portion of the property taxes from Ross Valley residents that the Larkspur City Council has decided they're going to keep. They could decide to allocate that through to us for sewer maintenance, and then the rates would be consistent. But and it's through an old agreement, none of us were here when that happened, but you pay this amount, and Larkspur and the Ross Valley Sanitary District doesn't get any of it, and everybody else in the rest of the Ross Valley Sanitary District pays this amount, and a chunk of that comes through to us. And the really unfortunate thing about this, and from my perspective, is Larkspur ends up paying higher rates to the Ross Valley Sanitary District because it's not equitably, we don't receive an equitable amount of the ad valorem property taxes across our entire district.
I get that. I get that. Thank you, though. I appreciate it. You said it very clearly, and I do get it. I just think that it's not fair to then pass the burden to the people that are living in Larkspur because a deal wasn't done in a way that, should have been done. So.
Just to,
If I may say something?
Sure.
No, this is our other.
Okay, I wanted to point out that it's actually a violation of the Prop 218 regulation for a ratepayer to be given a special discount or a different rate than another ratepayer. And so they're actually required by this proposition to make sure the rates are equitable. It seems unfair for people of Larkspur. I totally understand that. I wish Larkspur would give us a 3% ad valorem, but we're required to have equal rates throughout the district.
also, if I might just add, we have a section over here on Murray Park, and they've been their own little sewer district system over there, and we're currently working with LAFCO and trying to absorb, to annex them in. And the city, the county has given us an indication that they will give us the ad valorem portion, like the rest of the Ross Valley, so that Murray Park, which is over here, will get to work with the rates of the rest of the Ross Valley. This is, as you said, it's very historical.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I know I went over. I guess my last question is, who drafted this? And do you think that this was fair and actually communicated what was actually happening to the people in Larkspur? Just a question.
Yeah.
Okay.
I worked on it.
Okay.
And that point about, being higher rate up to Larkspur, we tried to communicate it. There's a paragraph in the
I
center.
know, it's just interesting. It says, under this proposal, rate revenue from the sewer service charge will increase 6.6% on July 1st, 2019. It's not right.
So
And that's even in your slides.
So that's rate revenue, right? So that was very carefully worded. It's the rate, it's not rates will go up 6.6. It says the district's rate revenue will go up by 6.6%.
And so then our rates are going up by 15%.
By 10%, yeah.
Right, and then
Got it.
Ross Valley's goes up 5.7%.
Okay.
So it actually goes up lower than 6.6 because that's the way the percentage works.
Okay.
But we didn't mean for it to be tricky. I mean, we went out of our way to try not to be tricky, but it starts getting awkwardly worded if we spend, so that it's worded correctly. But I understand why it's not clear to a person who doesn't stare at it like I do.
Thank you very much. I thought that was helpful for me to really present it.
Well,
As opposed to-
thanks for listening. I know it goes nowhere, but
If I
they
might-
try.
If I might say one more thing.
Yeah.
I know you've only been here for 3 months, but we meet once a month. We have an agenda which is published, and this is not, we didn't start discussing this a month ago with Mark.
Yeah.
We've been working on this for a really long time. The agenda's been out. We videotape it. It's available to be seen through the website. And it really has been discussed and thought out. And I love it that people show up. I wish we had more people show up.
Thank you for that. And I have to keep working to pay for the cost of living in this county, so I can't come to all these meetings. But thank you.
You, sir.
Thank you.
Name, community.
James Holmes Larkspur, and like previous speaker, I've actually been in Larkspur all my life, and it is still very confusing to me. Just for the record, I don't really understand it, but I understand that part of it is related to the Larkspur City Council decision. Just a couple of points or comments just on what I heard. My impression is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the increase is primarily to finance the costs of the cost spike for the new building and Larkspur Landing cleanup and catch up with the deficit. That was my impression. I see that one of the board members is shaking their head no, but that's the impression that I thought. I'll just go on with these questions and then, but the general manager made the comment that Ross Valley's situation is unique for a variety of reasons, including narrow roads, old pipes, and hills. But I noticed that Corte Madera has almost exactly the same factors as Larkspur, and yet it is at the end, at the far end of the lowest, whereas Larkspur will now be at the close to the highest. So I mean, it seems like some of the factors that are in Corte Madera don't apply as to Larkspur. I know, so something is a little bit odd there. Just a few comments or questions relating to the document she set out. The district states in its document that the sewer charge is needed to meet regulatory requirements and community standards. And so my question is what percentages to meet the regulatory requirements and what percentages to meet the community standards. And I'd like to know what the community standards are referenced so that the community can just really decide whether or not they want to pay extra to finance those community standards. I also wondered, I guess because I didn't do the math, the percentage increase each year, is that based on a percentage from the current rate or a percentage from the prior rate? Because it's a lot higher if it's based on, proportionally, it's a percentage of the prior rate. All right, so it's, in other words, so my general impression, and my math may be wrong, but it was about the overall percentage around 5 years, about 30%, give or take a few. So that's, I think, a huge amount, frankly. Another question I have to wonder, because it's very much an issue, to what extent is this reflective of increased requirements to finance pensions, which I know are going up everywhere. And certainly the allegations are made that a lot of the increases throughout districts and cities are really for purposes of meeting pension costs. And finally, the notice says that the the district is under a regulatory order. And it says, why now? The districts have been under regulatory order regarding to implement timely maintenance of our sewer system. And my question, and of course, as the district also mentions, they have been doing a great deal. So my question is, is the agency that is issuing that order, have they said that the current rate of repair is too slow and the rates are too low? Because if they haven't said that, then it would appear that the regulatory demands are not a significant factor in the rate increase. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's pretty cool. There's a lot of questions there. I'm going to try and answer some of them.
Sean?
Let me try. No, I'll go first, Don. Okay, because you can.
Okay.
One of the points was Corte Madera. Corte Madera receives a huge amount of property tax. And so their rates are lower because they have even, I think, double the property tax that we have for a small agency. But if you look at that chart too, Belvedere is hilly and it's next to a lagoon, high rates. Sausalito is very hilly and it's got some bayfront property and it's got high rates. Alto is a very small district. I'm not sure what's going on there. Our sewers average 65 years old. Is what's the average age of our sewers? We're the oldest sanitary district in California, and so it is difficult. It's expensive to repair these projects. We are under a cease and desist order we've submitted a list of projects that we have to complete to them, and it's on the permit. We say CMSA. CMSA is the treatment plant out there on Anderson Drive, and we pay about 50% of their bill. They're doing a fabulous job. They get the Gold Star Award for no any kind of problem with discharges, so really a good treatment plant. But we pay a lot of money to them. Let's see, what percentage is due to cease and desist? That was a good question, of capital. And what percent is due to replacement? The cease and desist has been big items. We've got pump stations. It's to get rid of the overflows. Interestingly enough, our average flow is just under 4 million gallons a day. During storms, it goes up to 55 million gallons a day. And so we have to build facilities to handle 55 million gallons. All of our pipes and our pumps can handle 55 million gallons a day, and the rest of the time is a trickle, if you compared to 11, 12 tons. A lot of our expenses too are replacing leaky sewers. We're really trying to lower the wet weather flows, which spike immediately when we get around and paint it, we go right up. And it's an old system. The pipes were, the pipe joints prior to like 1970, I think, were rudimentary. They just stick together, slap some concrete around it. Now we're putting in pretty watertight facilities.
The building finance? The cleanup finance?
Oh, yeah. The new building, we have an office building in San Rafael, and we have the Larkspur Landing site, which is very valuable, but it's got those PCBs on it. And so we bought a new building, which I believe we're going to have for 100 years. Everybody's asking us about consolidation. It's big enough for us to take in San Rafael if they want to come, or even what we do. But what it's going to allow us to do is free up 2 properties. We'll free up the San Rafael office, and we're going to spend a lot of money out of Larkspur Landing, probably in the $9 to $10 million range, to clean that up. But then we're going to be able to probably sell, lease, or make some money on those things. If we do decide, if we haven't, we'll sell Larkspur Landing, probably do something with it. We have to pay off a certain amount of our bonds automatically. And so the debt that we've got for Larkspur Landing is $9 million. If we ever sell it, we will immediately get $9 million of that money paid off.
None of the rate increase will go to either of those projects. Those projects are specifically funded by bond revenue that can be paid back.
Yeah, but the rates fund the debt service.
The debt service, but he actually said that the new building in Larkspur Landing cleanup was being funded by the rate increase.
Well, the bonds are, I just shouldn't say the bonds are.
Okay.
We tried to, some of our managers said.
And then Doug, did you want to talk
Yeah,
about the
Doug.
increased pensions?
Doug, you wanted to make a comment?
I'll tell you what, I'll.
I was halfway into my comment before I realized I was on mute.
Oh,
Thank you. Yeah, it was very important to the board that we look at the unfunded pension liabilities and the unfunded, what's called OPEB, other post-employment benefit, which is healthcare. Because we don't think agencies from California do a good enough job of addressing that. This rate increase allows us to pay off fully our OPEB, our unfunded OPEB liability in 6 years, and to fully fund our unfunded pension liability in 12 years, which in the long run will lower costs all along for all the ratepayers from that point moving forward. And we'll have an opportunity to be one of the few agencies in the state of California that has funded our pension liability. I'd also point out our unfunded OPEB, other post-employment benefits, are not generous. We pay 40% of the health care for our retirees only, no family, and only until they're 65 when they can get on Medicare. So we did have a full pension report during one of our earlier meetings prior to and as part of the Hildebrand rate increase study. So we addressed that head on and directly. I also want to point out one other thing. we have not, in any of our budgets, valued the Larkspur Landing property, meaning it doesn't have a value. If the ratepayers want us to sell that property, first off, we have to clean it. And secondly, if and when we do sell it, that would be money that we haven't put in our budget. So we did that to be conservative. So that's all I want to say that. I think that's what you understand.
I might also just mention, as far as the building goes, it looks like a very giant building. For the next 14 years, up to the next 14 years, half of that is being paid for to us by Comcast. We're getting revenues from them as we sit here right now. They have a lease. They have a lease. Actually, right at this point, they're paying for the entire lease, the entire building, but we're working that out. But, so it's not a big giant building, it's half of a big giant building. And it's also for the best practices of a utility like us, where, for instance, when we have these large rain events, rather than have our head of operations be at the Kerner building, which is several miles away from our operations depot, where all of our guys go out of, everybody could be together. We can have an operations room where, you know, black and whiteboards and everybody working together to solve these terrible problems, so that we're not spilling into the creeks and the bay and causing pollution, which is our ultimate goal, is to keep everything in the pipes.
I want to comment to the rate of repair. Suggested perhaps it's been slow. I've been on the board since 2009, I think I'm the granny here. The level and the extent of repair has been phenomenal. Sometimes it makes my head spin, because when I first came here, it was this little bitty stuff. And we had to increase all, I mean, it's a huge project, and that's why you put so much money into actually looking at all the pipes to get the criteria on which pipes need to be replaced right away, the worst ones, etc. But it's just been a whirlwind, and I feel proud about that. I'm a nurse, and I'm really into the health of the environment. So we have not been slow. Matter of fact, it's beyond what the district I ever thought could do. So I just want to comment to that.
Well, I don't dispute that, by the way.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to make that, because I don't dispute that, like, I think they have done a good job. That's why it seemed like, since you had done such a good job in the past, then why were we being hit for even more in the future? That's, I guess, was my substance. But I certainly don't dispute it.
Okay, thank you.
Would anybody else like to?
I don't really have a protest, but I still need to go to the...
Oh, if you don't, we really want you up there.
Tell us your name and where you're from.
Anita Larkspur, right here. I walked here from Larkspur Condos, and a former board member over there. So I have some informational questions about the wastewater overflows mentioned in the first paragraph. And I've heard about this, but first of all, I want to know what defines a wastewater overflow. What does that mean?
See,
Yeah.
we really hate overflows. And that's the difference between I and I. I and I, we can get
What's
into inflow and infiltration. What happens is, to avoid an overflow, we want our pipes to carry all this excess water to the plant. Unfortunately, that 55 million
And
gallons
you're
a
talking
day.
about the one in Anderson.
Yeah. If we can't handle the flow, then we have an overflow. And so, that's what we've spent so much of our money on, is to avoid overflows. And overflow is wastewater that comes out of the pipe. And our record on overflow, we get a matrix, a metric report monthly about our overflows, and they decrease markedly.
Are you talking about raw, untreated sewage that goes into the
We
bay?
hate that. That is rare.
Well, in our situation, it can potentially get to waterways. I'm looking back at Steve Mixes because he can probably describe this better, but when our systems get overburdened, it can come out, it can end up in the Corte Madera Creek, and then we get fined by the regulators. Now, one thing I think you should all know is that our relatively new general manager came to us from the state water quality board. So we have a former regulator now running our organization, which I think is a real wonderful thing. So our goal is to keep the sewage in the pipes, and so we have to build this infrastructure, but we have a report monthly that Tom referred to that tells us how many, we call them SSOs, sanitary sewer overflows, and then it categorizes them depending on the worst ones are the ones that reach waterways, because that's the last thing we want, and then there are ones that maybe spill out in somebody's garage or home.
Oh, actually, that happened at the condo.
Yeah, I mean, that happened to me, that's why I'm sitting on this board, because it happened to me a long time ago, and that's how I put it up in sanitary. But it doesn't happen anymore. What happens is tree root grows into a pipe, or something goes wrong structurally with the system, and then the sewage can't flow the way it's supposed to, and it spurts out somewhere else, out of a toilet in my case. Other SSO examples?
If I might make a comment.
Let's hear her question, I think
If I might just
Well, go ahead.
comment one thing. One of the things that we did 5 years ago when some of us first got onto this board was we approved in our budget to buy these things called smart covers. When you're walking around your district and you see a manhole that says Ross Valley Sanitary District, it's usually got a little green paint next to it that shows where everything's at. If you see one of those little Emerald City dots on top of it, a little reflector, that means that underneath there is a smart cover. And it is 24/7 measuring what is happening in those pipes. And our operations group gets posted 24/7.
If there's
What-
a surge.
If there's an issue going on. So like when, if a root grows in or a pipe collapses and the stuff is backing up, we get an indication before it becomes an overflow that this is happening. And 24/7, that's part of what we pay for. Our operations group goes out there, finds the problem, hopefully fixes it, and then we don't have an overflow. We started off with how many covers at the beginning?
Started off with 6 and ended up
6.
with 35.
And we're at 35 now, and we can move them around as.
So that,
we-
over on manholes.
Yeah, you'll see a little green reflector on the top, and that's what that is. And there's a transmitter with a battery underneath it that it gives our people real-time information about what's happening in the system so that we don't have overflows. And it's invaluable when we have the rain events down by Redwood High School, which back in the 50s was designed very badly. It gives us, we would have an issue there every winter was one of those words. And it gives us an idea of what's going on, and I think over the past few years, we've done very, very well there. So it's technology giving us information so that we don't have these problems.
So, right now though, let's say in the storm events this year, how much, I don't know, percentage-wise or gallons, how many overflows happened into
In the
Green or
storms.
the bay?
All that information is on CWIX, and I can provide that information. It's a state-run website. It is current. So it'll explain the entire
I mean, can
situation.
you just
We're
ballpark?
completing an audit right now in our sewer system management plan, and a graph is coming to mind from that document where 2 years ago we had about 38 reported overflows.
Yep.
And then the next, that was 16, 17. 17, 18, we had about 25. 38, 25, and this year we're at about 16 or 17. So those are guesstimates, because I don't have the graph right in front of me, but that's what we're reporting, in our audit. That goes, that's available to the regulators.
Yeah, we're not talking millions of gallons.
No.
That's actual events. Those are reported, and they tend to be small. They might be near, like on a street or in somebody's yard, because a lot of our sewers are actually in people's yards, because they're easement sewers. They're not all in the street. So they're mostly small volume. and there was one larger volume that was associated with a construction project in San Anselmo, and that was large, and that was strong.
Okay,
So we have these data, I gave you those 38, 25, 16.
yeah,
Those are rough, I think they're right, but those are annual reports, and every month in this packet that's online, we have a monthly report of overflows. And so there are metrics.
it's at your website?
That's right, on our agenda. And every month we have the
And
tally.
then once we have zero.
Yeah, and so, November of this last year, we didn't have a single overflow. But we also have started doing annual reports. And on our homepage, on our website, there's a banner where you click and you do different documents. One of those is the year-end metrics report. And that gives you an accounting for the previous fiscal year of all these data, and including repairs, how many miles we're repairing, so that you can get a sense of the data we're using to report out what we're doing. We have a metrics report, and we also have a year-end capital report, and that tells you how much money we spent last year, which projects that we completed, pump stations, gravity sewer projects. So we're doing our, we're trying to make sure that this information is available to those who are interested.
Okay. Basically, I'm asking because I want to know all this money I'm paying, is it helping? If it's,
Yeah,
so.
there was I did an article, and I do a monthly general manager's bulletin, and a couple of months ago, I wrote an article on San Anselmo Fire Station manhole. Because this was a site in 2017 that we had a major overflow. But since then, and that was during that really wet year, right, when Oroville Dam overflowed and all that. So there was a big overflow at San Anselmo Fire Station. We put a smart manhole cover there, actually. And so we were able to monitor remotely. We didn't have an overflow this year, even though I looked at the rain records. The rain was more intense this year in San Anselmo than in 2017, but we had no overflow. And we completed a major capital project in downtown San Anselmo in the summer of 2018. So in that intervening time, we lined, and especially one line was right alongside the creek where we suspect San Anselmo Creek was getting into our sewer. We lined that, and it didn't cause that surcharge to cause the overflow of the San Anselmo Fire Station. That's one story. It's based on observations, but we think it's evidence that these investments are making a difference in preventing sewer overflow, which is, I think, our #1 goal.
Yeah. And one other question. So we're talking about, the age of the system, and I was good to know that you're doing 4 miles a year of sewer repair and replacement. Is that the description?
I would say 4 miles of replacement, and I think this last year we assumed, between two manholes, if we go in and do point repairs, that we've repaired that whole pipe. So if you make that assumption, we estimate last calendar year that we repaired 6 miles in 1 year.
Can you just say how much a mile it generally costs?
Oh, I don't know if I've got that at the top of my head about cost per mile.
One and a half. It depends what the method is.
It's 1.5 million
Yes.
per mile?
It's underground.
Right, and when we repair, it's really nickels on the dollar because we're using in-house resources, and these 4-foot sections where we'll patch where the hole is, that we TV the pipe, we find out where the defect is, and then we put in the liners, and that's just a crew, half a day's work. We're talking on the order of $500 to $1,000, where if we replace that line and dug up manhole to manhole and rebuilt the trench, like 10,000 or more. So, $500, 10,000 bucks. We like the $500, and so we're really trying to do repair where we can, so that you get a cost-effective rebuilding of the system.
So my question, I'm leading to the good question, which is what percentage of sewer lines remains to be repaired or replaced? And how much have you done? First of all, how much have you done, and
Well, we've done the worst of the worst. I mean, this is one thing that we figured out by closed circuit televisioning all of our systems, and we found the worst problems. And I remember the former general manager saying to me, we figured out if we go fix 5%, the worst of the worst, we're gonna stop 50% of the overflows. So we've done the worst of the worst, and now we're doing the, whatever, not as bad, the other categories.
We
but,
have 200 miles
Yeah.
of pipes that belong to us.
Okay.
That's our issue.
And
There's another 200 miles of laterals which go from our pipe to your house, which are
Which that
our
way
But
you
we
don't
paid for that.
That is true.
You do, and in the middle of the night, if there's a problem with your lateral, you're gonna call us and we're gonna be
Is
there
that what the?
at
that's
2
what
o'clock in the
this
morning.
gets me? Can I get your personal supplement? I'll count.
No problem.
Okay, so out of the 200 miles,
Go kick that manhole.
what has been done, what needs to be done?
Well, you know, what needs to be replaced? Eventually, every single pipe. You know, they have a lifetime. And so the best way to do it is to address, you know, with our system. I'm amazed at how high-tech this wastewater operation is. We've got computer operations, we've got virtual imaging of our pump stations. But, you know, some pipes, there are pipes in Istanbul that are 2,000 years old.
No,
Istanbul.
2,000 years old. Istanbul.
Istanbul.
I thought you said our. Istanbul.
So, you know, maybe some imperfect, you know, the soils quite, you know, last and last. But really, it's just keep after it. And, you know, it's never going to be an airtight system. Look, the water district, take them, they're moving from repair to repair. We're doing the same thing. But we've got a program of, you know, replacing the worst. And it's...
Well, what percentage is the worst?
Okay, 5 years ago, when we first got slapped with the cease and desist order, and the new general manager, Greg Norby,
I don't, what's that? What is that?
the cease and desist orders,
Yeah,
we were
what
told by
order
the
was that?
Regional Water Control Board, okay, here's 4 miles that you have to fix next year, and here's another 4 miles that you have to fix the next year. And they were arbitrary fixes, you know, here, this 4 miles we want you to do, and this 4 miles that you want. And Greg Norby came in, he said, I just got here, give me a few months. And he went in and we CCTV'd, we did an assessment of, I think it was every 10 feet of the pipe in the entire system. And he put it into a giant spreadsheet and factored in proximity to a school, proximity to a stream, type of material that was used, when it was built, and the condition given to us by the CCTV, and did a giant sort, and went back to the Regional Water Control Board and said, okay, this is the worst. So we want to do this 4 miles first, and this 4 miles next, and I can't tell you what percentage we've done, but I can tell you that last I looked at that chart, we're pretty much done with it. Have everything working on everything that was red, so that we can get to the point where instead of chasing red stuff, we're working on yellow stuff.
And there was a pie chart with high risk was red, the next level was yellow, and green was good. And in a couple of years, we reduced the high risk red markedly. I think it was like 70%, you know. And the high risk was very expensive. I don't know how much percent of the, I guess we could figure it out. But, you know, what we wanted was get rid of the red risk and then next work on the yellows.
Where is this pie chart?
We can provide it to them.
The IAMP is on our website. I'm just looking at it right now.
Infrastructure
And it's sort
asset
of like
management plan.
a map, and it shows the different grades of the pipes, the worst, good, the bad, and the ugly kind of. And it's really well done, the study. I mean, if you look at it, we've done 2 miles a year for sure, right?
More like 4.
And this was done in 2013. But now we've really bumped it up to 4 miles, if not more a year. So you would kind of guess in a way.
Well, no. Okay,
I mean,
well, I'm just saying, I'm a little frustrated that you can't quantify this.
I'd be happy,
We can get you the information.
I
We just
here's
don't
my
have it
card,
on our
and
fingertips.
I can point you in the direction of all of that information. In fact, I also
took out from my packet. This is the monthly operations and maintenance metrics report. I think there's some interesting information in there.
Yeah, but is this, how technical, am I getting?
No, it's very
No.
easy to read.
Okay.
Very easy to read.
But the thing is that everybody else here doesn't get that
It's all
information,
online.
so.
It's all online.
100%.
Yeah.
And as far as the annual capital repairs, we do have our technical services manager here who can probably answer some of our questions with a little bit more clarity that you're looking for.
Yeah.
For capital, in terms of replacement, not including the repairs, by the end of next year, we'll have done more than 30 miles of pipe. So, and that's starting in 2013-14, fiscal year 2013-14. So,
Sorry, can you say that again?
by the end of next year, we'll have done more than 30 miles of pipe. And that's manhole to manhole, full pipe, replaced or lined. So, and that's since 2013.
By the end of 2020.
By June of 2020.
A year from now. Thank you.
And then there will be, we have kind of one more of, you know, the higher risk group pipe. That would be another 3 miles. So we will be 30 miles of 33 miles at the end of June 2020.
Doug, you wanted to comment?
Just two quick things. I wanted to point out that we have a lateral program in the Ross Valley that Corte Madera just adopted. It's a leadership program, in my opinion, where we're making homeowners replace their laterals. When the water comes in from rainstorms and overflows the system, we mentioned it's 50 million gallons from the Ross Valley. Yeah, but it's another 50 million gallons from Corte Madera and San Rafael. So you have about 106 million gallons of infiltration rainwater coming in on high rain days to the Central and Sanitation District. Now, as we're lowering ours through pipe replacements and pipe repairs and lateral replacements, one of the things we're doing for our ratepayers is we're lowering our cost to CMSA. We currently pay about half of CMSA's budget. But as we repair and replace and our infiltration goes down, our payments to CMSA will become less than 50%, and that will significantly lower our costs for our ratepayers moving forward.
Which is down now to 41%, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
No, not
It's
41.
about 49.
49.
49?
Yeah, but it has gone down.
1%. It went down over 1% over 1 year. Our share of the cost of Central Marin's plant, mostly due to inflow infiltration.
We believe.
You know, there's another factor. I'm actually very proud of this district. When I started 5 years ago, there was lawsuits. We had a cease and desist order. We were tangled with Corte Madera and Larkspur and Central Marin. I mean, it was the worst of all worlds. We're discharging our wastewater to the same place. We want them to do well, and we want to do well. This board got rid of the lawsuits, all of them. We straightened out a lot of our personnel matters. We kind of a famous district back a few years. We had a manager that spent some time in the clinker. And we've gotten over that. When I started, our credit rating was A- by Standard & Poor's. Over the last 5 years, it's gone from A- to A to AA-. Just last week, our credit rating was raised to AA. And I think we're a candidate for a AA+, which is, you know, absolutely fabulous credit rating. And that's going to help our debt, our bond saving, because our credit rating is so high. You know,
And that will reduce, say, the next step.
and that'll reduce our interest costs. And
Yes,
you know,
so
and
that
pass
saves the
that on.
ratepayers money if our credit.
And then the other thing is, over the last 5 years, I've seen the technology of this district kind of expand. It's unbelievable. We talked about the smart covers, which are really cool, because they let us measure flow all over. Where is the problem area? We'll put a smart cover out there, and you can read it real time at our office. Amazing things like that. We have a TV computer truck. I don't know what they're doing in there, but they can communicate with each other. You know, we used to send the truck out to the site. Oh, we need some parts back. The truck goes. You know, now we take a video picture of it, send it back. They send the materials out. It's very high tech now. We have reduced some employees since I've been here. I think we were 38, we're down to about 35 now. And we're still doing, increased amount of work with fewer employees. What else?
The regulation of wastewater has increased dramatically in the past 10, 15 years. So the cost of doing business for this organization, as a result of what the federal government requires, and the rules just keep getting steeper, has gone up dramatically. It used to be, I think, not a very highly regulated industry, but with the Clean Water Act, and we want to keep the sewage in the pipes, and abide by all rules, it's gotten more expensive. So when we talk about a fancy trunk.
If I might say one more thing, Mark Hildebrand here what you saw was a static presentation, but a lot of what you see there, when we were working with Mark, we would say, well, what would happen if you reduced the rates over here by this much, and we could watch the lines all adjust to the point where our critical reserves would go below. We say, okay, well, we can't do that. So this is not out of thin air that we pulled these numbers. We really sat for long periods of time with Mark and did the what-if analyses and trying to cover every possible base that we could. What if this happened? What if that happened? What if this amount goes up? What if CMSA goes up and plugs it in? And what we came upon here was, what can we do so that we're not going, so that we're responsible for the next 10 years and with the next 5-year issuance of this 218. So that was an amazing tool, which we did not have before.
This is the part where the public is supposed to do everything.
Oh, yeah.
John, you're next.
I just want to make one last point, and that was that because of the work we've done so far, recently, we're not getting fined. We used to get fines in the, what was it, millions of dollars?
Well, we got one big fine.
You ratepayer money and burning it,
Yeah, that's right. Would anybody else in the public like to make it? Yes, sir.
My name is Catholic, and I've lived in Larkspur for 45 years. And I'd like to propose a better, fairer way of paying for this for the ratepayers. I had hoped to provide you a system in writing.
Can I ask you to come and stand closer to this over here, instead of behind the dais?
Okay. Yeah, I had hoped to present it to you in writing, but I've had a bunch of health and family emergencies that prevented me from getting it together. At 6% a year, it's compounding interest. It doubles in 11 years. And I don't see any end for it in the long run, because after 11 years, you might have an earthquake, that'll break up the system or whatever. So we're going to have infinite increases forever. We need a better system of paying for the ratepayers. And when you get your water bill, it has a graph that shows how much water you use, how much the district uses, the average that the district uses. On my bill, I use about between 5 and 10% of what the average water user uses in Larkspur, and even less of what less of the district, and even less of what the average user uses in Larkspur. And a large part of what I use, the water I consume, actually goes into my garden as spray water. So I'm putting very little into your sewer system, costing you very little. But all my new neighbors, with their McMansions and their Teslas and they're dumping a whole lot into your system. And it's not fair that I should have to pay what they pay, the same amount that they pay. They're dumping vast amounts of water into your system. I'm dumping just very little. So my proposal is that you do it for the other district, the other utility systems do it. You have a base rate that pays for like 50%. And everybody pays. Bottom floor is 50%. This is the way the PG&E does it, the way the water department does it. And then the rest of the money you need is paid for by the use of what people are putting into the sewer. And the way to determine that, I don't think you can have a smart meter on every lateral, but the way you do it is by the amount of water they use, which is very accurately presented by the water district. And so the math is really simple. Say you need $1 million, and the district uses 100 million gallons. So the ratepayer pays a penny a gallon. And that would give you the same amount as you're getting now, same amount of income as you're getting now, but the users will be paying by the amount of water they're dumping into your system. And this will be very much appreciated by the water district because it will, for those of us in Marin that still watch their money, you know, that can afford, they can't afford, like all my new neighbors, you know, this $1,000 increase is nothing to them. It's just a couple of nights dinner. But for the rest of us, the old guys who are still here, hanging on, barely hanging on, you know, it's a big increase. And so by paying by the amount we use, it'll increase the incentive to conserve water, because we're going to have dry years again. With climate change, it's going to get more radical. More wet years and more dry years. And so that's what I would propose, that you go over to a system like that. It'd be much fairer and much more accessible to those that are willing to, you know, conserve their water and conserve what they put into their system. You know, I'm very careful. You know, I don't put any fats or grease into it. I'm very conscious of all these kind of things. And I've trained myself over the years to do it. Because, you know, we had a bunch of dry years in the last 45 years I've been here. And I've been able to keep my garden somewhat green by using the gray water system. And so another thing you could do is you could have an incentive for people that install gray water systems, so you have less going into your sewer, which will lower your costs and lower your emergency costs too, because you'll have less going in. So that, you know, I had hoped to prepare a better, more concise, better said presentation for you, but I didn't get a chance. I'm not a good public speaker either. So that's what I would propose. And, you know, this is going to get to be so much that I won't be able to afford your increases. If we calculate every 10 years, hopefully I'll live for another few of those 10 years. I won't be able to afford it. You know, right now, the amount I pay on my taxes, about 60% of it goes to you guys. And, you know, in 10 years, it'll be more like 70 or 80% going to you guys. So if you can't do the setter system, is it possible for me to, or maybe you can have a system where I could put in a septic tank and a composting toilet and get out of your system, save you the trouble of dealing with my sewage, and save me the cost of paying you thousands of dollars a year, which I'd probably get a better deal on installing my own septic system and my own composting toilets than paying you guys. I'll probably save a lot of money over the years. So that would be my next question. Or another thing is, there's still a bunch of people in the Ross Valley that when we moved here, you know, we're just regular folks. And now Well, the new folks are very wealthy. All my new neighbors are very wealthy. You know, when you go down to high school, the student parking lot's all filled with new $50,000 cars. When I moved here, the kids all walked to school in front of my house. And so we can't keep up with it, so we're going to be forced out. So another system that some utilities use and some tax systems use is we pay you when we move or die, when we leave the house. That's when we pay you, and you owe us the money, or we pay you then. We don't pay you as we go, and you know, in most cases it'll only be 10 or 20 years, and you can also charge, you know, an extra fee because it will be taken out of our equity, which is going way up, but our income is going way down, or non-existent in many cases. So those are some proposals to have a better, fairer rate increase. You're probably not going to do it today, although I wish you would postpone this and investigate possibilities of doing it a different way, charging us a different way. You're probably not going to do that. So, but for next year, I would hope that you would spend some time and check that out. It's very doable, very easy to do it, much fairer, and there'd be greater incentives all around for everybody to conserve water and watch what they're putting in their sewer system, increase the consciousness, increase the environmental consciousness, cut your rates way down, cut your emergency bill way down. You'll have less, you'll have more room for the emergency water coming into your system. I guess last thing is, how do I follow protest?
Yep. Florence, are there comment cards on this box?
Yes, we have comment cards right here. And if you want to fill those out and leave them, that would be great.
So, Mr. Albert, you just need to put your name and address and say that I'd like to protest the rate increases, and then you can hand it to me and it comes.
So if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to hear what you guys think about my proposals.
Thank you. Yeah, Joe.
Okay. First off, I want to thank you for being very conservative and caring about what you put into the school system, because it does affect the school system, affects letting people getting back to review. Just briefly, and while I understand your suggestion, actually Marin Municipal Water District is being sued. I believe it's Murray versus MWD on their tiered rate. So it may not be legal for them to do what they're doing, which is to charge different amounts for different water usage, because state law requires that the utilities charge for the cost of providing the service, not an additional cost. And so most of our service cost is not related to how much is conveyed to the central wind sanitation district to replace the pipes and to maintain the pipes. Those were fixed costs. And so I'm afraid that the tier rate thing, we'll have to see what happens with Murray versus MMWG. I think MMWG will lose that lawsuit, to be frank.
So without knowing what your financial income situation is, the Ross Valley Sanitary District does have a lower income assist. And how much is that?
25%.
25% off? 25% off. And Felicia can certainly point you in the right direction up here if that were of interest to explore.
Actually, Julie, our clerk of the board, is here.
Somebody up here.
So I want to bring up that, Steve, you and I had this conversation actually at a meeting about volume, rate, how you, Novato has it, correct? Novato Sanitary has it.
They have a system that's not completely wise. No users, medium users, and high users.
Yeah. I mean, is it possible for us to do a system like that?
It's possible. At this time, it's not advised because the precision of the Marin Municipal Water District meters is low compared to the North Marin Water District. They have more of a sophisticated technology, and that they have complete overlap with the Novato Sanitary District, so they can precisely measure the flows in a way that's accurate. And in the case of Marin Municipal, they don't have the remote smart meters that North Marin has. So that would be a necessary first step. And for us to implement it, then we'd have to go a portion of the Marin Municipal Water District and partner with them to get the monitoring system set up. So we need to add another person. We need to hire somebody full-time to make that happen. So that would be, you know.
You could at least get the conversation started with them?
We can, and one thing though I would caution everybody, and I know President Gaffney probably echo this, is for sewer systems, flow-based approaches are fraught with problems. Because the actual costs in a sewer system are majority fixed costs. Having the ability to flush the toilet from a remote location in Fairfax and for it to get to CMSA and treated and go to the bay is what you're paying for. It's not how
why I suggested only half of it be flow-based and the other half be.
Well, I've come from a school of thought as a civil engineer, long-term practicing, that none of the costs for sewer should go to flow. And it should all be based on the fixed, because that's where the dollars are. And if you look at the contribution of the flow to the system, is overwhelmed by the stormwater. So as Tom pointed out, we have 4 million gallons a day, and that's what we all contribute to when we flush the toilet or use the laundry or take a shower. That's the 4. But the system has to be built to convey the 55. Because that's what we got to prevent from overflowing into the bay and the creeks and into schools and on the streets. And so the costs to convey that storm swollen flow, which no matter how tight we make the system, will still be there because of Mother Nature. And just it's the way it's going to happen in this system. That's where the cost is. So the cost is associated with having a fixed system of pipes and then pumps to move it over the hill to the treatment plant. So, you know, it's not easy to hear because you think, well, I'm not putting as much pressure on the system. Well, that's actually doesn't affect our operations or costs unless you're putting a lot of fat oils and grease in, or if you have a lot of trees on your lateral where we have to come in and remove roots. You know, it really is independent of the amount that you use. It's just
So what I suggested, we give you the same amount of money.
Yeah.
It's just who would pay it for it could be different.
Yeah, so it's really a cost of being part of the system and the community. It's like, I'm a citizen, I benefit from not having sewage in the streets. This is part of what I pay. You know, we all pay equal because we all have a single family residence. But we recognize not everybody has the same income, and so we use the same system that PG&E uses.
Same usage.
Well, that's where the different uses are like commercial. Like if you have a restaurant, you get a different rate because you're putting more high strength that requires more treatment. But all the single family residences are a fixed connection to a community system. And it is independent of the amount of water you put in our system, our costs.
That's what I want to change, yeah.
Well, it's reality.
It should change.
Yeah, but the costs of our system have nothing to do with how much water is put into
You'd
it.
still be getting the same amount of money that you need every year.
So
it's just different people that are paying for it.
Yeah,
Those who conserve
flow-based
water
doesn't work for
pay
sure.
less.
It doesn't work.
You know, some agencies use
Thanks for your
flow-based
attitude.
system, you know, kind of with a base rate. And I can think of like the city of Vacaville. They have a base rate, which is a fixed cost. And it's, as I remember, 86% of the cost is the base rate, 86%. And then the 14% is the variable. And so they happily instituted that. And bam, who shows up? All the people that water. And they were getting gorged, you know.
All the people that what?
That water their gardens.
Oh, water their gardens.
You know, and well, it's the used winter consumption, but people around here water their gardens in the winter. So they had to then put a cap on the amount of volume that was charged. Now, and, you know, a place like Vacaville does water, and so they've got the water data there. San Francisco uses water. They do the water. And so we get data from Marin Municipal that's, 6 months late by the time we set our rates. And I suppose, we could adjust to it, but it isn't a, catch-all fare. It seems like we're overcharging use, or it does. It seems like it. If you measure use or something, it seems like it. But if we switch to a water-based rate, you're going to be inundated with the users. Mill Valley started a flow-based rate. The first year we lost 25% of the revenue. That would be a killer for us. So it isn't that easy to implement.
The system I proposed, you wouldn't lose any revenue, it would be the same amount.
Then when the people who aren't discharging to the sewer come in, and you go, look, there's the garden, here's my water. It's not going to the sewer. So we don't have a good, there's no really good market talk about this. There's a problem measuring wastewater. There's just no way to do it.
You don't have a fair system now.
Water consumption is not wastewater flow. It's not wastewater flow.
I'd also just mention, if you look at one of the graphs up there, it's not the rate increase forever. We've really been working on this hard to get to a pay-as-you-go system. And we're working hard to get there. And in 6 years, our plan, could be changed, is to have 3% a year increases ad infinitum. That's pay-as-you-go, not taking on any more debt. And that makes a lot of assumptions, because who knows what's going to happen 6 or 7 years out. But the plan is not to have this just, it is to go on and on and on, because if you look at what's happened in the past, where we don't do an increase, we don't do an increase, we don't do an increase, then all of a sudden we have to have a massive one. Marin Municipal Water District is having that right now, where they didn't increase for many years, then all of a sudden they increase like crazy and everybody's screaming. 3%, our cost of living adjustment to our employees, the cost of construction is going up. And our plan is to have it at 3% a year out into the future. We've got it planned out until 2030.
What?
Yeah.
I want to say
So
one
when-
quick thing on the gray water. I believe Marin Municipal Water District would be the people to talk to about that.
Well, as I recall, we tried to institute something and we couldn't find a contractor who wanted to come in and we allocated some money for it.
We did, that's right.
And we couldn't find anybody who wanted to take us up on, come up with something creative, gray water wise.
It's been a while, but I think.
Any more comments from the public? Anybody else like to speak?
I just wanted to clarify one thing. Did I understand you to say that even after their repairs, there's going to be tremendous inflow, and that the problem of the storm inflow continues? I thought one of the major effects of the repairs was to diminish the inflows.
Yeah. Yes, and so to clarify, we need to continue to do the repairs to reduce the magnitude of the inflows to a more sustainable rate where sewage is always in the system. And so, but I wanted to manage expectations of everyone that there is no such thing physically possible to have a watertight sewer system. It is absolutely impossible to have a watertight sewer system.
But it would diminish, wouldn't it?
But it would diminish. And I think, with strategic implementation, doing the CCTV work, the risk management, the prioritization, we focus in on those pipes where we get the best bang for the buck. And we will get a measurable reduction in the peak flows. But we have to recognize in our designs, as I'm a civil engineer, that we have to design to carry the storm, even in a modern system, in our setting, because we still have the 200 miles of pipe, And as you heard, in 6 years of doing an aggressive program, we get 30 miles of that. And that's us, and with those spikes in capital spending, it's not sustainable for us to invest that much that rapidly. So we will always have some measure of stormwater infiltration into our system, but we can reduce it so that we prevent sewer overflows. And we're showing signs that we're being successful doing it.
And even if you're watertight, isn't this the capital of illegal storm connections to the sewer? People tie their storm, their gutters to the sewer system because they don't want to have to pump it out into the street. So
There is a constant surveillance needed, and as part of our O&M team, we're finding new connections of stormwater to our system, and then we get those disconnected, but then they'll come back, you know, and sometimes it's just inadvertent. It might be a contractor working for a homeowner, has to connect a pipe somewhere and just puts it in the sanitary sewer instead of the storm drain by accident. So these things, it's just part of the chaos that is out there, you know, that we have to keep a constant eye on those things. So you're right. Regardless of how watertight your system is, there's still many incidents that we have to manage that increase inflow.
Just very quickly, very quickly, recently in San Anselmo, due to all the storms over the past couple of years, a hillside is coming down and took one of our pipes with it. So we're working very closely with the city of San Anselmo to get that shored up. That's their responsibility, and us to fix that pipe, because stuff happens.
One more.
In my neighborhood, when the old guys like me leave the house, die, the houses are replaced with these McMansions. And these McMansions cover up all the ground. So all the water that used to go into the ground now goes into your sewer system. I don't see it flowing. I see all these rebuilt houses, or new houses, where the old houses were. They're covering all the ground. The part that isn't covered with a house, the enlarged house, is covered with fancy brickwork and concrete, big driveways and stuff. I don't see it flowing into the street. They're putting it into your sanitary system. And this is happening to almost every old house around.
Well, that's something we'll keep an eye out for. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. I think it was a great explanation. I now hereby close the public hearing. And we'll take a break so we can count the number of ballots. And then we'll protest and come back. So maybe about, how long do you think it'll take? Several minutes, a few minutes?
Let's shoot for 10.
10 minutes? A 10?
Yes, 10-minute break.
Well, I'd like 55.
We'll shoot for 5.
What's the count?
The total count of protest votes per parcel is 46.
46 parcels. It's very difficult to overrule Prop 218 notice like this. We sent out, what, 15,000? And then 46.
15,000?
No, it was about 10,400, somewhere in that area.
10,400?
Yeah, it's in the 10,400 range, right in that area.
Anyway, I'd like to go to agenda item G, consideration of adopting ordinance number 101, an ordinance repealing ordinance number 65, adopted May 1st, 2014, and enacting this ordinance relating to sewer service charges. Are there any discussions from the board? Any discussion?
No.
Okay, we need a motion.
I move that we adopt ordinance number 101, an ordinance repealing ordinance number 65, and enacting a 5-year plan for sewer service charges.
Second?
Any further discussion on the board? I don't have to go to the public, we've already done that, right?
We've already done public hearing.
Okay, roll call.
Borstein,
Yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
Meggs,
Yes.
Scylla,
Yes.
Gaffney.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, back to our agenda.
Doug, you need to
You catch your
get on the
plane?
plane.
With that, I'm gonna leave the meeting now.
Okay.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
So noted.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to open time for public to raise items not on the agenda. Anyone wishing to speak to the address? Does anybody wish to speak? Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 8. These are our committee reports. The Finance Committee. Michael and I were the Finance Committee this week, or month, I mean. And we went over virtually every financial issue on this month's agenda, including, we have a big construction management contract to consider for the Larkspur Landing remediation. And that Larkspur Landing is going to cost about $9 million, and we've got the EPA all over it. So we need a good construction manager. We talked about that. We also reviewed the budget for the fiscal year, and we reviewed the rate study yet again. So I think that's about it. The Finance Committee's probably gone over the rates, I'm going to guess 7 or 8 times in detail. Central Marin Sand, that's our treatment plant agency. Okay.
Well, there was some really exciting news, and then there was not such good news. The really exciting news is for a bunch of years now, we generate biofuel from the treatment plant, and rather than just flare it, we have a power cogeneration plant where we take that biofuel and we turn it into electricity, and we have been running almost 100% of the entire CMSA operations on biofuel. So we get almost zero from Marin Clean Energy from PG&E. And we have been working very, very hard to get to the point where we can actually create more than we need and send it back out over the wires so that Marin Clean Energy then can use that energy, and it's completely green energy. Well, we flipped the switch last month and we did it for a day. It was very exciting. And it's a 30-year-old cogenerator, and there was one bolt somewhere. It would have happened anyway, but it was very loose. And the next morning it let loose, and our cogen engine ground to a halt from 7,600 RPM to 0 in about that much time. And the inside of that engine looks really bad. So at this point, we are buying power from from Marin Clean Energy to the tune of about $80,000 a month. So there's a big impetus to get that fixed very quickly. We've found a replacement engine in Wisconsin, and I think we're gonna get it really cleaned up. It's a used engine, but it'll be newer than the one that we had, identical, and they're gonna bring it out and put it in, and hopefully that'll happen within a couple months. We're probably gonna have to take that engine down for maintenance anyway, so we're really not gonna be out that much money at the end of the day. So, and then when that comes back up, we'll hopefully start pushing power over the network again, which we know we can now do.
How long is that going to take to get it back running?
Oh, I think a couple months. Yeah, the engine works. I mean, you turn the key and it powers up and goes. So we know if they pull out the old one and put in a new one and do all the connections, it ought to just work. It ought to. The other thing that we're doing is, in the meantime, we had planned on installing a second engine, brand new. The old one was 750 kilowatts, it's 30 years old, it's not very efficient, as efficient as the new ones. And we're going to be putting in a 1.065 megawatt cogenerator that is going to be put down to just below 1 megawatt because regulations require that. And it's gonna go in and it should be online by the end of 2020. At which point we will be able to generate a lot of energy that we will be sending out onto the network. Where the digesters are like big stomachs and they can get ill. So you can't just start feeding it candy and expect that it's not going to get a sore stomach. So actually we bought 2 little mini digesters and we've started a program where we're studying how much new material can we feed into the digesters before the digesters will get sick. And that kind of thing will be, there's a lot of beer being made in this county, and the waste from that beer is all fabulous for creating biofuel. Cheese, the same thing. And we're going to try to continue to expand our organic waste program, that pre-consumer organic waste program, working with Marin Sanitation Agency. So, good news, bad news. It's really all good news at the end of the day. It seemed like it was really bleak, but that was really the big stuff. We've been here long enough.
Thanks.
That was the big. Those were the big deals, and it's very cool stuff.
Okay, North Bay,
North Bay, we had a guest speaker from the San Francisco PUC, Paula Kehoe. It was fabulous. They're moving towards a one water, so it was very interesting to hear a lot of their research, and instead of a linear approach, they're moving towards an integrative approach, bringing in other agencies. And also she talked about climate change, water, power, sewer. 2.7 million people use Hetchy water, which is 165 miles from San Francisco. So that, it was just really fascinating, all her facts. Let's see. I also learned about green bonds, because San Francisco only utilizes green bonds. And we have talked, Stephen, about, and I'm assuming it's because we're investing in something green for the environment, is where most of that comes from, correct?
Yeah, well, almost, I asked Tom, but my sense is that in the bond market, when we issue revenue bonds, we're known as green bonds, because we are helping, we're socially and environmentally responsible investments, and they're under great demand for investors to have that in their portfolio. So whenever we put revenue bonds on the market, they are characterized as green bonds and sell like hotcakes. So we actually are successful every time we go out to market because we are green bonds.
essential service.
Yeah.
Does that mean you get a better interest rate?
Yeah.
You borrow less money?
Yeah.
Also, she talked about, they've created, if you build a big building more than 250,000 square feet, you have to put in a gray water system in the building. So I'm like, okay, we're in general, but we're not even close. San Francisco is just way advanced.
What do they do with the gray water?
We recycle it through the building for plants or whatever.
Yeah,
You don't have any land.
Yeah,
they landscaping.
yeah. So, I mean, the health department has to get involved.
They actually use black water.
Black water?
Yeah, they take toilets and
They use it for the plants.
and they actually have like an on-site septic and treatment system, septic tank and treatment system, and then they turn around and use it to flush toilets.
Wow. I have to go over there and check it out. So anyway, the other thing I learned, the windmills in San Francisco Park, they were built in 1936 to pump water, recycled water for the plants. So anyway, it was really interesting. And then last in the meeting, Grant Davis was there, and Damon Connolly, and they talked about their trip to Washington, D.C. They went to a water resources and the environment workshop, and brought up some issues about Highway 37 and how we're going to approach it, and issues around the Army Corps, which we always know there's always issues with the Army Corps. So they're looking at extreme weather as applied to climate change. But the interesting fact that I learned is, all the crop money that's coming forward, most of it is not really for the North Bay. It's mostly San Jose and San Francisco. They're starting to look at that. Why is that happening? They need to change how they apply, and it could be applying as groups rather than alone for grants. And that's it.
Okay, thanks. Agenda item 9 is verbal report by board members and staff and requests for future items. Board members, any verbals? Nope. Staff?
I'll keep this brief. You mentioned it a little earlier. We spent a little time last couple of weeks, met with Standards & Poor's, the credit rating agency. They raised our credit rating from AA- to AA last week, and that will help us with our interest rates and it helps the ratepayers.
Did they put steady or like in the AA? There's another word usually.
I don't remember seeing it.
Okay.
But I noticed the minus was dropped.
Got rid of that. Yeah. And the rule of thumb is each little increment is 20 basis point, 2.2%.
Wow.
Right, so we just got
2% less.
0.2% lopped off. If we were at 3, it'd be 2.8.
Right.
So that's real money on the debt service. Also want to thank the board members. All 5 board members came to the ribbon cutting event we had last Tuesday, June 11th at Pump Station 12 and 13. This was an $8.6 million project with the 2 pump station combined. If you used to drive between Chevron and Pachi's Pizza, used to think, oh, there's an aroma there. There must be a sewage installation. You can't tell that anymore. And we actually had the folks that own Bon Air Center. Andrea Schultz was a speaker at that and commented on how great the pump station is. Tom did a nice job of welcoming folks. And like I said, all board members attended. Assembly member Mark Levine's staff attended, as well as Marin Clean Energy. And we had at least, I don't know, Florence, 40, 50 people.
About 50 people.
About 50 people even though it was over 100 degrees. We had tents set up and a virtual tour of the pump station. So thanks for everybody for their participation. And last but not least, Michael Borstein on tuba. And his Golden Gate brass band created a great ambiance for the event.
I had helped, it was not a tuba solo.
Anybody, any other stuff?
Oh, it was AA stable. It was
AA stable.
Stable, yeah. We met. We went and had a public meeting in this room on June 5th with LAFCO about annexing Murray Park with Murray Park residents. And that's a process that will go on for another year. We gave Doug Kelly, board member Doug Kelly and I gave a presentation to the City of Larkspur City Council on the proposed sewer rates. And we're very close to getting the grading permit from the City of Larkspur for the Larkspur Landing excavation remediation project. Kind of getting through the final stages of that. And we expect to see construction activities begin around July 1st for soft mobilization activities and actual excavation by July 15th, maybe soon. So we're continuing to work on that. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Can I ask a quick question? Just, when you talked to Larkspur, did you get a lot of pushback and explosive responses, or no?
Well, they wanted an explanation why they have a different rate.
Yeah.
And, so we did our best to explain that, but they protested on behalf of their 5 parcels that they own.
Consent calendar, matters listed in this item are considered routine and enacted by one motion. Would anybody like to remove anything from the consent calendar?
Yeah.
I wanted to do C because just to show an example of what's going on. Anybody else? Okay, let's go to 10C. And what I wanted to show here was that we have a change order again. This change order is a savings of $182,000. And this is for our 2015-16 gravity sewer, why pull a change order that's going to save you $180,000? Because the list of projects, basically, it's about 35 different projects. And each one has to be evaluated, usually by the construction manager, or Catherine, or Public Works group. But every single one has just about has an adjustment, plus or minus in it. And so I think by doing this, we see these construction management costs, but here they show, they go both ways, and they get agreement as we go on these really projects. And so it resulted in $182,000 change order in our favor. And that's it, that's all. I just wanted to point it out. Motion on the
Move.
You just gave
Second.
Any discussion from, okay, any further discussion on the board? We have it in roll call?
No, here. Yeah, could I, before you do the vote, I wanted to just recognize a couple of guests we have in the room that are on the consent calendar.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to introduce Gary Skrell, the Selmas, who's over here. That's which one?
Good to see you again.
Who appreciates your consideration and calling out item 10C and how the value of construction management in saving the district's money by keeping an eye on all these moving parts. And then I also want to introduce Pippin Cavagnaro of Newt Engineering, who we were asking, or who we're proposing to have an on-call services contract with to deal with unplanned or emergency engineering needs in the coming months in case they arise, because we're doing a lot of capital work, and so our in-house resources are stretched, and there's a chance, if things come up unplanned, such as need for permits or emergencies like the landslide you mentioned in San Anselmo, it's helpful to have an on-call engineering contract with a local knowledgeable engineer, and Pippin at the engineering.
You live in Roseville?
I don't actually, I have septic tank.
True.
And that isn't without issues. I just had it serviced.
Live in the valley? Live in the
I
valley?
do, yeah, I'm in Woodacre. Mark Wilson would have joined me tonight, but he was actually working on the very proposal Steve was mentioning about getting a cost estimate together for this emergency slide repair at San Anselmo.
Okay, so do we need a roll call vote? Okay, roll call please.
Doug is no longer here.
He's not there anymore.
He's not there anymore.
Okay, then no, you're good. It's when he's on, that's the idea of it.
Oh, I see, okay. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, we pass that one. Item 11 is a proclamation of the Ross Valley Sanitary District in recognition of Catherine Hayden. Whereas after 5 years of service as an engineer since 2011, Catherine Hayden was appointed Infrastructure Asset Manager of the Ross Valley Sanitary District, serving approximately 47,000 customers in the communities of Fairfax, Larkspur, Ross, San Anselmo, and unincorporated areas of Wayne County. And whereas since her appointment as Infrastructure Assets Manager and later Technical Services Manager, Catherine was responsible for successful compliance with the 2013 cease and desist order from the Regional Water Board, with the resulting achievement of improving the regulatory and financial standing of the district. And whereas Catherine has worked over 10,000 hours for the district, attending approximately 72 board meetings, 73 tonight. Helped pass 12 district ordinances and spearheaded the district's private sewer lateral grant and loan program, providing worthwhile and financial relates more than 1,500 private laterals for $3.5 million of grant funds allocated to district customers. And whereas Catherine has worked tirelessly toward the rehabilitation of more than 35 miles of gravity sewer lines, there's that number.
There's that number. 35 miles.
The modernization of pump stations, a 95% reduction in wet river sewer overflow volumes, and an $80 million capital program The project's in various phases of construction, and whereas Catholic was forward-thinking by instituting metrics and activities reporting, as well as numerous technological upgrades, such as the district's first computerized maintenance management system, CMMS, implemented a data-driven decision approach using capital and maintenance management of the assets, and established many incentives, including shared service partnerships with other local agencies. And whereas Catherine designed and implemented the district's condition assessment and repair program to track the life cycle and status of various assets, and using this system, district staff has assessed over 1 million feet of pipe, performed over 2,500 pipe repairs, and restored over a fifth of the gravity sewer system. And whereas Catherine, in her role as infrastructure assets manager, performed a large diameter condition assessments, oversaw the repair crew, which is responsible for over 2,500 cured-in-place point repairs, and implemented the SMART cover program for infiltration and inflow study. And whereas Catherine is the type of person who attentively listens to customer concerns, worked cooperatively with other local governments to achieve multiple benefits, valued understanding of other points of view, managed and motivated 12 to 13 staff members, and was solution focused, and she was always dependable, thoughtful, respectful, and professional in her role as technical services manager. Now therefore, I, by virtue of the authority vested in me as president of the board of directors of the Ross Valley Sanitary District, do hereby commend to Ms. Catherine Hayden for her years of outstanding service and express our sincere appreciation for her service to the Ross Valley community, and wish her good fortune and satisfaction in her future endeavors.
Is that your resume?
Pretty good one. It answered all her questions. 35 miles of pipe.
Yes.
Thank you, Kevin, and you can go home now.
Absolutely.
Thank you, really appreciate it.
72.5.
You know, I remember when Greg came on board and he said to me, you know, we really have on staff all of the talent we need. And he was talking about you and you. And so I really agree. You've been through this district from bad to good, so I'm glad you stuck around.
Thank you very much. For stabilizing the factor. Okay, agenda item. 13, we've done 11, we've done 12. 13, consideration of authorizing the GM upon review and approval of legal counsel for task order number 5 with KJ in it, in it not to exceed $883,190 for construction management of engineering services during construction for the Larkspur Landing evacuation and excavation.
Excavation.
I said evacuation.
Evacuation.
We hope we don't have to evacuate. Excavation and remediation project. Whoa, how come it costs so much?
Well, good, I'll
That's his
let our consultant answer that, but I'll just note that Kenny Jenks has been working for the district for several years, while Greg was here, managing, getting the approval from EPA to even have permission to clean up the PCBs. And actually, Todd Miller, who's here with Kenny Jenks, worked for a different consulting firm, I think, even back in the 2000s, for Malcolm Kearney, doing some of the original characterization work and the first cleanup that occurred back then, I believe. So we're fortunate to have Todd stick with us, and in December you approved task order number 4 for $73,000 to prepare all the construction bid documents and get us up into the pre-construction range. And so that process, I will say, just as a client, went very well. We were were able to meet deadlines that were pretty strict to try to get construction, a viable construction window this summer. It meant we had to meet strict timelines to get bid documents together, go out to bid, have the pre-bid meeting with contractors, open bids, and then award the contract last month in May at the board meeting here. And so I think they deserve a lot of credit for managing that more or less within that budget and setting the stage for the need for construction management and engineering services during construction. So this isn't just construction management.
That's right.
This is where we need any kind of design work based on change conditions we may come across as we excavate. And, you know, we think things are characterized a certain way. We had a thorough grid, but it was still 50 feet on center, more or less. There's things that can happen between those 50 feet in terms of what's the things, subsurface, we may need some engineering services. That said, that's about 2% of the contract construction budget, 2%, and often we'll budget 3 to 5% for such engineering services. Because, well, this isn't pipe work, this isn't pump station work, so it's not quite that complicated. Similarly, the construction management percentage is in the order of 8% of contract costs, and a lot of our projects, including the 2 that were just initiated, construction management is more like 10 to 15% of the contract cost. In this case, it's 8%. So while the $883,000 sounds like a lot, it's on the lower end of the range for such budget. And there's contingency built in case we need to stretch into a second construction season for unforeseen circumstances. They have built in $75,000 for budget to deal with extended schedule, just in case, you know, things get squirrely or weather-related delays and that sort of thing. Things are going okay. As I mentioned, the Larkspur grading permit process is proceeding according to the schedule we had hoped for so far. Still not completely done, but things appear to be on schedule, and we think this is a reasonable budget. And again, it's a budget. It's a not to exceed amount. So it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to cost us much, but.
Correct.
And so with that, that's my introduction as
Thank you.
to staff. But Tom, do you have anything to add?
I think that the process we've gone through over the last many years, you know, we came to you, I think, 3 years ago and said, here's what we need to do. And we have worked tirelessly with, you know, the district as well as EPA to get to this point. You know, part of our budget and a small part, but part of our budget is that continued communication with EPA, because at the end of the day, we need to make sure that whatever we do out in the field is reflective of what they've approved. In other words, the goal of the projects is at the end of the day, EPA can sign off and say, yes, you've met the conditions of the pre-approval, and that they agree that we've cleaned up the site. So the construction management portion of the job really is that. It's watching over the contractor, it's making sure the contractor is fulfilling his contract responsibilities, but also performing in a manner that's going to be acceptable not only to the district, but to the community and to EPA. So at the end of the day, we're confident that what needed to be done can be reported as it got complete.
Yeah, that's great. And you're also doing what's called a remedial action completion report.
Correct.
And that is what?
That is the
final document for EPA to do whatever they do.
Correct. So what that is, that's a culmination of all the documentation that we compile throughout the process. So we're going to take all the analytical reports, we're going to take all the contractor notes, we're going to take all the waste manifests, we're going to compile it all and prepare a somewhat summary report with a lot of appendices to really document and demonstrate that, you know, what we're reporting is done actually got done.
Is EPA, would they, if something is amiss, are they going to stop us and make us get it right, as opposed to letting us finish and then telling, no, it's wrong? Do you see what I'm trying to say there?
That's precisely the role he's serving.
So correct. So one of our roles, one of my role is that continued communication with EPA. So I will be talking with EPA on a weekly basis and informing them, you know, if there's a change in condition. So if we look at the conditional approval, if we look at what EPA has said we need to do, as long as we're fulfilling that, there shouldn't be any question at the end of the day. As Steve said, you know, when you open the ground, things may change.
Yep.
And so we want to make sure that EPA is fully aware and that we notify EPA immediately in change of condition, and that we work with EPA to get it resolved. So, yeah, we definitely want to make sure we're proactive and we're working with EPA to get those problems solved, rather than waiting till the end going, hey, by the way, that never goes well.
How long is this, so you said it might stretch into 2 construction seasons, so is there a time limit on this, or?
It's a fluid time limit, so right now, if we start early to mid-July, which is the projected start date, so we've got what we call a soft mobilization, starting to get the equipment on site, setting up trailers in early July, with a hard date of starting to actually grade the site and do other things no later than July 15, but really we're shooting for July 8. If we start in early to mid-July, we're looking at being done probably around December 12th. Most of that time really is managing that off-haul material. So as you can imagine, there's roughly 40,000 cubic yards of material that needs to be moved. That's on the order of 6,900 truckloads that need to not only leave, but come into the site. We've got to haul contaminated soil out, bring clean soil in. So it's a lot of truckloads, and we're limited on the number of trucks per day. So when you do the math, you're looking at about 140 days of hauling right around there. So it's simply going to take time to get it done.
We had the pre-construction meeting on Monday. I believe it was favorable because we had EPA at the meeting with the contractor, and they were able to communicate directly. So there was a lot of positives there. But at that meeting, I was impressed with the contractor's phased planning approach, where it was really clear that there were 3 phases, and that the goal would be, no matter what, get the first 2 phases done for several reasons. The most contaminated areas and the more high-risk construction with more shoring. And then there's a 3rd phase, less contamination, less shoring and high-risk construction that could be, if the wet season's coming in and getting wet conditions, we could put off that 3rd phase until we get dry conditions again the following spring or summer. So I felt like it was a good contingency approach. The goal is to get all 3 phases done this calendar year by December. But in the event that we're running, having scheduling challenges for whatever reason, this 3rd phase is feasible to be postponed until appropriate weather conditions.
It's a lot of hours and a lot of days.
A lot of trucks.
Any comments from the
I have a question. I'd like to assume that, from what you said, that the EPA is still trying to protect the environment, and Trump hasn't turned into the environmental pollution agency?
There you go, yeah. EPA is very much concerned, and that's been the reason it's taken so long to get their approval, is they have torn this project apart on paper to make sure that everything we're doing is a benefit to environment, community, and that they can sign off at the end of the day, yes.
That's good to hear.
Trump isn't going to miss the opportunity to stick with California. Okay,
I move that we authorize the general manager, upon review and approval of legal counsel, to approve task order number 5 with Kennedy Jenks in the amount not to exceed $883,190 for construction management and engineering services during construction for the Larkspur Landing excavation and remediation project number 900.
Second.
okay, any further discussion, any more comments from the public? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Item 14, consideration of approving resolution 1559 to adopt the budget for fiscal year 2019-20. So this is the head.
Have a good trip.
Good night, guys. See you guys.
Big daddy.
Yeah. this is the adoption of the budget. The finance committee went over this for about an hour and a half or so. More. We've seen it before. We received this last meeting. Did the staff get any comments from any of the board members except for the finance committee? Okay. So any comments from
We made a red line version available in the packet so you could see the changes between the May draft budget and this final proposed budget. And on that, we reconciled the board adopted strategy for paying back OPEB and pension liability with how we categorized it in, as an expense. And so that gets put into the benefits category and it's spread out among operations and administration. So that made the benefits portion higher than in the May budget.
We had a comment that, gee, the benefits really jumped, but what it was our payoff. OPEB.
Is the OPEB.
Yeah, and, the pension.
Right.
Yeah.
And then one other change was we're incorporating the recommendations of the compensation classification study that we conducted, comparing ourselves to 10 neighboring agencies for our salaries and benefits. And as we discussed earlier, so that's budgeted for. It's not, that can always be amended based on next month's discussion about those proposals on salaries and benefits changes that are a recommendation out of that study. But that does account for the percent increases that you see in salary and benefits.
Exactly.
And the take home on that was generally we're below the market median compared to our neighboring sanitary districts, on the order of 8.7% as a global number on salaries and benefits. And so it's uneven among each categorization, classification, but that's the general story. And so generally the budget is increased by about that much to meet the goal of having our salaries and benefits match the median, the average, the central tendency of sanitary districts in our neighborhood.
Okay. Well, this is what our rates are paid for. And we talked about a lot of the things, relevance about it. Any other comments from the board?
Well, I've got some here and there, but page 14, on the capital expenditures, paragraph 2, or actually paragraph 3. District staff working with the board finance committee to evaluate alternative finance approaches, and was concluded that issuing a new $35 million revenue bond in 18-19 is necessary in order to complete those capital projects. But it's not all capital.
It is all capital.
It is all capital? So 19-20 is the next round of 35 million, correct?
Are you saying the fiscal year is more?
No, I'm trying to figure out, is that what's wrong here? That the dates are wrong?
Yeah,
18-19 should be
19-20.
19-20. Okay, now I'm not so crazy. The other, then, it says to complete those critical capital projects. Well, 10 million's going to clean up Larkspur. I don't know if that's really considered a capital project.
If it isn't capital, we can't sell it on.
Right, but the way it's worded in here, it's not correct. 6.5 is given out of the 35 million to buying 50% of the building, or, so that, I don't see that as a capital project.
Absolutely.
How do you define it?
Well, the capital is really a material asset.
And it can be a purchase, and bond counsel is all over what we can spend the money for. So they, believe me, have reviewed exactly what, it's called the description of the project. They're all over it. And they got a tax guy that fights with the bond counsel guy over stuff like that. So, I mean, we don't, I guess you've got an approach that you believe like construction or something, but you can buy something, and that's a capital project.
It's different from our infrastructure that we're building,
Yeah.
but it is a capital, it's something that we're gonna hold for a long time. It's not just an hour
And we're
maintenance.
improving Larkspur Landing, that's a capital project.
Okay, so I beg to differ. I think that should be added in there somehow. That is just not, I mean, is buying a building a critical capital project? No.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I mean, I can understand where she's coming from.
I just want-
Project sounds much more like our infrastructure projects.
I guess if we're talking about
Projects.
doing another 35 million revenue bond, I mean, there, in the bond draft that we saw in May, it did specifically talk about where some of the money was gonna be divided up, right? Clearly. I can't find in this budget, unless I missed it, because it's really long, talking about we are gonna take 10 million out here for Larkspur Landing cleanup and then paying back for Anderson. Is there a place in here I missed?
Is it in the budget?
Is it in the budget? Does it say that anywhere?
I'm sorry, what was your question, Dr. Knight?
Question was, does the budget talk about pay, like calling the bonds when we sell Larkspur Landing? It doesn't
No,
talk about.
the budget doesn't really talk that, in that detail about the bond covenants specifically.
Why did you leave it out?
It's an annual budget for sort of the expenditures and revenue of the district. And so from the budget standpoint, bonds are debt service, revenue, but the specific bond covenants, as Newhouse mentioned, are not material to the actual budget itself. That's how the bonds get executed, but it's not a critical item to be enumerated in the budget.
It does make reference to Schedule 10, so I've flipped over to Schedule 10, which deals with the Larkspur. See, it says, see Schedule 10 for specific cost information, the sentence before the paragraph you were looking at. So then you flip over here and you do see Larkspur Landing EPA clearance, Larkspur Landing site facility improvement is 111 Anderson in here somewhere.
You're on Schedule 10.
Oh, sorry.
The purchase of the
Schedule
building
10. Is,
actually happened in, as Director Knight pointed out just a couple minutes ago, the purchase of the building was actually effective in fiscal year 18-19. And so when we did the resolution of reimbursement, the bond, which we did in April, the board did in April, it allocated a certain amount of the bond proceeds to reimburse the district for that building purchase that occurred in April of this year. So it's the purchase of Anderson isn't in the 1920.
I got it. Anyway, there is some more specifics about the property stuff you want to schedule them. So that wouldn't actually be a capital expenditure. Well,
Where's, I'm sorry, but it's 10? Here's mine.
I was just noticing that where the section you were reading from did refer to this other schedule.
What line?
Last line of the first paragraph.
I'm back at Schedule 10, where are you?
Well, it just says here, yeah.
14.
It says see Schedule 10 for specific cost information.
So maybe if we just add special projects to there, maybe that would, I don't know, I just.
Purchases?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, critical capital projects and purchase and rehabilitation of district property or something, or district.
Comma purchases.
And where would we find then the Anderson property in the budget?
Well, she's saying it wasn't in the budget because it got purchased in April, so it actually got purchased in 1819,
Previous fiscal
not
year.
1920.
But we're taking the money out of this budget to pay for that, so I would assume it should be in here.
Oh,
I can happily add a reference to the reimbursement resolution.
Is that from the bond? Or is that just separate? We just make
Remember
it
we
separate?
passed a reimbursement resolution
Yeah.
before to say
Well,
we're
once
going to pay ourselves back.
Once we get the bond proceeds, we're gonna reimburse ourselves. So that would just bring in the 111 Anderson property.
Okay, if those changes can be made on page 14 to add, maybe referencing to Schedule 10 even?
There is a reference for it, on the set paragraph before.
Okay, let's just note down below.
I mean, you could add a little paragraph about 2019 revenue bonds.
That I would feel really comfortable with, if we could do that, then I could vote for it.
Are you entertaining a motion?
Yeah.
If there's more, no more
Are you all
comments.
done?
Uh-huh. She could
Okay, good.
Oh, okay.
All in favor?
Wait.
I move, we
Wait, we gotta open it to the public.
I move
Wait,
we
Stephen.
adopt the resolution.
Any comments from the
What
public?
eating?
And we can take a motion, and then we can.
I move that we.
Wait, just hold on 1 second,
I thought you
please.
said we
I
were-
thought you said, well, almost, I just want to make sure.
Okay,
I'm kind of nervous on this thing.
I'm not sure what that
Hold on. Probably driving, but I'm just not like 100%. So this is what we're voting on, is the resolution, okay?
Which is the budget.
And then you're gonna reference the bond on that one area?
I think a little paragraph.
I can add something about the bond on page 14.
Okay. I think that we did. Just one quick question on page 13 on the red strikeout page. There's this, the change between the draft budget and the final budget and capital expenditures almost exclusively due to the carry-over funds of capitalized equipment that included the previously approved purchase of the new condition assessment van. The purchase was not finalized, but is expected to be made in early. Do we have any kind of rough estimate on what that's gonna cost?
$537,000.
Oh my God.
Roughly.
Wow, that's about 5 years of my salary. Okay,
It's a really cool truck.
that's it for me.
I move that we approve resolution number 19-1559 to adopt the budget for the fiscal year 2019 and 2020.
Second?
Any comments from the public? Any further comments from the board? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Just a really monumental amount of work. Thank you so much to
Yeah.
staff.
I'm sorry, Director Meggs didn't move.
Oh, I'm sorry, thinking, yes. I voted yes. Kind of hesitant about it, but I voted.
15 information items to go on the matrix.
Can I ask one question before we go on? Did we finalize the minutes? Because I have a correction. And I'm sorry if I missed it, I probably
Oh, we received
did.
it.
Director Meggs, would you like to state it for the record, or would you like to give it to me directly?
Well, it says I wasn't at a meeting, but if you look at the beginning, I was there.
Okay, then
It says Meg's absent, and that's all there is.
I believe you were actually out of the room when the agenda was approved, maybe perhaps making a phone call, and you returned for the rest of the meeting. So you were absent for that vote, but you were there for the rest of the meeting. which is why-
That's not true. That's not true. I was there, and I voted no. You're talking about the property?
No,
this
the
is
approval of the agenda.
Oh. I could have stepped out of the room, but anyway, I was there for the meeting. I just wanted to make sure that,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's fine.
I have two corrections.
Thank you.
Okay, 15, metrics. There it is. It's late,
Good night. Thank you, Melvin.
Thank you, Melvin.
but I liked it. 8 miles of inspections including lateral replacements.
I almost during the public hearing to the May SSO percentage, 0.001%, but it sounded like I would just be bragging.
Thank you, everybody. Meeting adjourned.
You no longer banging the gavel?